Hello, my name's Nish and welcome to the Word on Cars. I'm in Europe at the moment, driving across 7 countries to experience the absolutely stunning roads that Europe has to offer. And to do that, I have the perfect car, a BMW Z4 M40i. Now, some of you might be thinking, why not something exotic like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini? But there are a couple of reasons why I chose the Z4. I wanted a car that was small enough to get through narrow European roads, something with a boot that was big enough for my luggage, a drop top to take in all the sights. And the cherry on top is that this Z4 is much more affordable compared to the Italian exotics. So let's hit the road so I can show you why this little German beauty is so underrated. So, driving the BMW Z4 M40i. Now, truth be told, I haven't given the Z4 a second look since it was released in 2018. But having driven this car across 7 countries and clocking up over 3,500 kilometers, I'm thinking maybe I should have. Now, I had to put the roof up because it's over 30 degrees today here in Zurich and it is burning hot. So, roof up, unfortunately, but we can still talk about this car. Now, in terms of styling, the Z4 I think is one of the most attractive roadsters you can buy because it's got this really long clamshell hood, it's got a really short rear end, it has the proportions of a sports car, and it's a clean and simple design. I mean, to be honest with you, this car reminds me of the BMW Z8, which some of you may remember from the movie The World Is Not Enough, James Bond, and that is a very, very exclusive and expensive car these days. It's rare, and the Z4 to me is the same. It's got that same level of simplicity, yet it's elegant and sporty all at once. So styling wise, I actually think that it's a pretty convertible. Some convertibles out there, especially cars that come in either a convertible and a coupe version, they look a little out of place. They look a little awkward. Whereas this is perfect. I mean, it has the proportions that you would expect in a sports car and it looks fantastic. And I can't tell you the number of times people have stopped and taken photos of this car. I think this car gets a lot more attention than people would expect it to. And I think that's because the Z4 actually looks more expensive than it actually is. And I think it's also rare because you don't really see too many Z4s on the road these days because a lot of people haven't bought them. So styling wise, I think that this car, as far as a convertible goes, is really pretty. Oh, and you can get the Z4 in 7 different colors. Now, 4 of those colors will cost you, 3 of the colors will cost you around $1,500 on top of the price of the car. There is a very unique color, which is like a matte gray. It actually looks like a black matte vinyl wrap, and that's gonna set you back over $5,000. Now, this one's finished in Alpine White. I personally like this color because it makes all the black accents, especially with a black rag top, really pop against the white. So, Alpine White, fantastic color, but you've got 7 to choose from. Then we have the interior of the Z4, which is a nice place to be. The interior is luxurious. It's what you expect from BMW. You have soft touch surfaces on the doors, the dashboard, everything is covered in leather. You do have 4 colors to choose from. The material used in here is called Venasca. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And you've got brushed aluminium buttons and surfaces throughout. You have a bit of gloss black here and there as well. I mean, it's just a really nice interior. It is really comfortable, looks good. Everything is where you would expect it to be. Now, BMW throws in these sports seats. They're not bucket seats by any means, but they are really comfortable. They keep you in place. And like I said, I've done over 3,500 kilometers of driving in this car across 7 countries over the last 2 weeks. And there hasn't been a single point in time where I felt uncomfortable. I mean, it is superbly comfortable. And this is exactly what this car was designed to do, is just to drive across a continent. And it does that so well. I mean, cabin is fairly insulated. I mean, it is a roadster at the end of the day with a rag top, so there is a little bit of wind noise that comes in. And even driving this car at high speed with the roof down, it's not as loud as one would expect it to. I mean, I was doing 150, 160 with the roof down, and it does keep the sound down as much as it's possible. Now, BMW also throws in this perfectly round steering wheel, no flat bottom in here. And I think it looks fantastic. It has this retro feel to it. And given this is a roadster, I think that's perfectly suited for this car. Now, from a space perspective, the fact that it doesn't have a flat bottom really doesn't impact your knee room. There's plenty of knee room in here, leg room, headroom as well. I'm 5'9" tall, and I fit in here perfectly. My friend, who is 6'6", jumped into the driver's seat, and it was really easy for him to get comfortable. So even if you're on the taller side, even though this car is small, you'll fit. Now, tech-wise in here, BMW gives you a decent-sized infotainment screen. It's a touch screen, and that works really well. It does have BMW's older version of iDrive. You don't get the newest version in this, but you do get Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. They work really well. You do get some controls on the center console here as well. A rotary dial with a touchpad on top and some helper buttons around it. But to be honest with you, I think it's a bit of a waste. BMW could have saved some money by not including those, because I have not used them once. All you need to do is use the screen. It's touch screen. It responds really quickly. It works really well. And when you're using Apple CarPlay, I mean, you don't need anything else. So from that perspective, the infotainment screen in this car is perfectly fine. BMW also gives us a digital instrument cluster in the Z4. Now, I am really not a fan of this instrument cluster because there is so much going on in front of you. They also include the smallest needles for speed and RPM. I'm not kidding. It is so difficult to tell where your tack is when you're flying down the road, revving this thing out. In automatic mode, it's perfectly fine because the car is changing gear for you. But when you are actually using the paddles or the lever to shift through gears, it is really difficult to see where that needle is. And because this car revs so quickly and is so responsive, that needle is moving. It blends in with the background. For some reason, it's a very similar color to the actual dial itself, so you can't see it. I think BMW really needs to go back to the drawing board with this one and just clean it up a little bit. Or give us a couple of different driving modes based on whether you're in Sport, Sport Plus, or Sport Individual, so it's a bit more clear. Now, you do get a map in front of you as well for navigation purposes, trip information. There's a G-force meter in here, which I think is pointless. There are a couple of dials in here for power and torque. Again, pointless, because when you're putting your foot into this thing, you're really not looking down to see what they're doing. Would have made sense to put that into the heads-up display, and you can see audio information in there as well. Now, heads-up display, that works okay. Basic information, navigation. You can operate your audio as well and skip through tracks using the buttons on the steering wheel. It gives you speed sign recognition in front of you as well, driver assistance. So all of that information is directly in front of you in your line of sight. So that works nicely. And I gotta say, I'm a little disappointed by the stereo in this car. It sounds okay. At low volume, it really does lack clarity and crispness. It is very difficult to hear the music. And I'm talking about with the top up. Put the top down and it becomes even worse. Crank up the volume, it gets a little better. It really depends on the type of music you're listening to. BMW could have done better. I mean, you can live with this. It's not too bad, but I was expecting it to be a better stereo system. Now, on top of the buttons that BMW gives you to operate the infotainment screen in here, like I mentioned, you get a rotary dial with a touchpad and a bunch of helper buttons around it. BMW throws in a separate bank of buttons for your climate control, which is fantastic. You've got heated seats through that same panel as well. There's a little helper screen in there as well that tells you temperature and fan speed, so that's quite nice. And below that, there's a volume knob along with a row of buttons for radio presets, to skip tracks, change modes, so on and so forth. So it's quite nice that BMW's thrown in physical buttons in this car as opposed to integrating all of that into the infotainment screen. I quite like that. In terms of driver assistance in the Z4, I mean, everything works quite well. The adaptive cruise control has been an absolute godsend because I've been using that along the Autobahn, Autostradas, all the freeways, and it does really well to read the traffic signs as well. I mean, it has had its moments because in some areas, the traffic signs are really not marked all that well, but this car has done brilliantly to try to keep up with it, and it's made driving this across 7 different countries super easy. Now, it does have lane keep assist, so it's not really actively trying to keep you centered, but when you do go off the lines or into the curb, it will pull you back gently to keep you in the middle of your lane. You do get rear cross traffic alert, you get a high def camera system to see behind you. It doesn't have a full 360-degree camera system though, which is a little unfortunate, but it does the job. So safety wise, this thing has pretty much everything you'd really be looking for, and everything works really well. There's also decent storage space in this little Z4. On the center console, under the sliding lid, you have space for a wireless phone charger, a little more storage next to that, a 12-volt power outlet, and a USB-C port. Under the split lid center armrest,
There's 2 cup holders in there, along with a little more storage in between those, and a USB-C port. Now, what I really like about that split lid is that the driver can continue to have an armrest, but the passenger will need to give up their side if you have bottles or cups in there. The doors do get tiny little door bins. They're big enough for sunglass holders, as I've found throughout this trip. But you do also get some space behind the front seats. There's a netted storage area. Now, there's space there, but the problem is it's not partitioned, so when you are driving around corners, things will fly around. But having said that though, for what this car is and the amount of space you have in here, it's pretty decent. Cargo space in the Z4 is actually not too bad, considering again how small this car is. There's 281 litres of space in there, and that's been fine for a couple of small suitcases and a couple of backpacks on this trip of ours. I haven't been able to fit my large suitcase in there though, but you could quite easily get a medium-sized suitcase in there with a couple of backpacks for a weekend away. So from that perspective, it gives you enough space. And what I do like is that the roof itself doesn't rob any more space from the boot, unlike some of the older BMWs that had a shelf you pulled down when you wanted the roof to be able to go down. This doesn't have that. So you can load up the boot and the roof will still go up and down, which is nice.
So, performance-wise, this Z4 is a little trooper. So we have the famous B58 BMW engine in this. It's a straight 6 3-litre turbocharged motor, and it's the same engine you'll find in the Mark V Toyota Supra, which BMW and Toyota built together. The Supra is probably more BMW than the other way around. This thing has 285 kilowatts of power, 500 Newton meters of torque that kicks in as low as 1800 RPM, and you definitely feel that with this car because it is so responsive. Just breathe on the throttle in either Sport or Sport Plus modes. There is also a Sport Individual mode in here, so you can customize things to your liking. And this thing is punchy. I mean, 120 kilometers an hour at the moment, put your foot into it and 132, 143, 152. I mean, this thing builds speed like no one's business. This thing just goes. I mean, it is quite impressive. 4.1 seconds, this car is no slouch. So from a performance point of view, BMW's really wrapped up the convertible of this car around a very nice engine. And I have to also say, from a consumption point of view, we've done nearly 4,000 kilometers in this car, 3,927.5 kilometers to be exact at this point in time. And BMW claims this to be around 7.5 litres per 100 kilometers, which is a combined consumption. And I've managed to get this thing down to around 9 litres per 100 kilometers. And mind you, that's with some pretty hard driving and some freeway driving as well across the autobahns and autostradas. So I think that's pretty good. I think the 7.5 litre claim, it's pretty bang on. Now, the automatic gearbox in this is an 8-speed automatic with a torque converter. And even though it is a torque converters these days actually work really well. I mean, DCTs were a thing back in the day, but now they shift as quick as a DCT does. Now, this is no different. In Sport or Sport Plus modes, you can bang through gears in this very, very quickly. I must say the downshifts in this are actually a lot quicker than the upshifts, but when you are doing some performance driving, it works really, really well. Now, stick it into comfort, it is really, really smooth in terms of its gear changes. In Sport Plus modes, it does make the gear change ever so slightly aggressive. I wouldn't say it is as aggressive as some of the more dedicated performance cars out there, but you get a little bit of feedback. I mean, banging through the gears. Now, I'm sitting in 7th gear right now. If I drop it down to 5th gear, there is a little bit of physical feedback, which I quite like. I like that. Now, in Australia, we can only really get this in an automatic with this torque converter. In European countries, you can get this in a manual, which is quite nice, but I actually think the automatic is the way to go with a car like this because it is a cruiser. You want to be able to take this down the highways, the autobahns, the autostradas, or just for a cruise and just leave it in automatic. And then when you want to have some fun, you just stick it into sport mode and away you go. So automatic is my recommendation for this car, and it works so well. I mean, let's change some gears, and it's 162 Ks. I love Europe. Now, suspension in this car is actually quite good. Some might criticize this and say it's not really a performer, and it's not a track car. It's not really designed to go around a track, this, on the other hand, is really a grand tourer that you can drop the top on, right? And it does that really well. Comfort mode glides down the road. It does really keep you comfortable. Like I said, I've done over 3,000 Ks. I'm pushing nearly 4,000 kilometers of driving behind the wheel of this car. And to most part, I've kept it in comfort because you have the performance you need under your right foot when you need it. And it just glides down the road. When you do stick it into Sport or Sport Plus modes, the suspension does stiffen up and it becomes a lot more lively. You can hang on to corners, and it has a ton of grip, which is quite surprising. And I wasn't really expecting that, given this car is rear-wheel drive. Now, don't get me wrong, you can put your foot into it in a corner and get this thing to go sideways, which is a lot of fun. But you can also drive this quite precisely, as long as you know the limits. And this is currently running on winter tires, and even with those, it's really managed to give me the grip that I need around corners and some of the hairpin bends that you find in Europe. So I think suspension in this is really, really well set up. This does ordinarily come with 19-inch wheels, but like I said, running winter tires, so it has 18-inch wheels on this. So it does help iron out the road a little bit more. On 19s, it might be a little bit stiffer, but I think overall, BMW's got the balance for this perfect. And the steering in this works really well and in perfect harmony with the suspension of this car. It's a bit of a point and shoot, really. I mean, the front end control is fantastic. You get really good feedback from the front wheels. The rear, when you do push this into a corner, rotates around perfectly. And like I said, there's a fair bit of grip until you don't have grip, but it's really something you can regulate quite easily. You can really control this car, and the steering really contributes to that. Now, the feel is fantastic in comfort mode. It's nice and light. Like I said, it's a cruiser. Stick this into sport, and the steering does get a little bit heavier, but it's not extremely heavy. It's still maneuverable. It's easy to drive. It's comfortable. I mean, the steering in this is quite surprising, to be honest with you. I wasn't expecting, well, I probably should have expected it, because BMW does do some really good steering racks. No vagueness. I mean, I could sit behind the wheel of this car and drive this every day. It is a fantastic steering setup. Braking in the Z4 is also brilliantly set up. Now, this gets M Performance brakes, and in European countries, you definitely need some good stopping power, which this has. And I say that because when you're driving down the Autobahn or the Autostrada, where you're doing 170, 180 Ks an hour, you've got drivers in the right lane that pull up in front of you without indicating, you need to stop this thing. And I've had that happen to me a couple of times, and this thing just responds with no issues at all. Pedal feel is fantastic, nice and progressive, no initial grab or bite. There is a little bit of bite at the end when you are coming to a full stop, but you can regulate that with your foot. And even after hours of going around corners in this thing and driving it quite hard, I didn't feel any brake fade at all. So you might get away with these brakes on a track day session. I think they'll do perfectly fine, to be honest with you. So I think BMW has really done well to give this car the performance it has, but also the stopping power, because you definitely need it. So the Z4 M40i Roadster is a brilliant little car. I love it. And what's interesting these days is that competition for the Z4 is pretty limited, because the Audi TT RS Roadster, which was a great car, doesn't really exist across most regions in the world anymore. There's always a Porsche 718 Boxster, which will cost you around the same money. This Z4 will set you back around 157,000 Australian dollars, drive away without options. But that's going to get you a base model Boxster, so it's nowhere near as quick as this Z4, and doesn't really have the same level of creature comforts either. Now, you could always go out and buy yourself a BMW M2, which will cost you less money, is more track capable, even gives you 2 extra seats in the back and a bigger boot. But the Z4 is really not about being track capable. At the end of the day, the Z4 is a lifestyle choice. It's for those that want to get on the open road, drop the top, and get the wind in their hair, get some sun, and just really enjoy life and have fun. And after driving this car across 7 countries and over 3,500 kilometers, like I mentioned, this car does exactly that. So much so that, like I said, I'm a little in love with the Z4, and I think I want one.